Part 4: Greenhouse Gases Reduction Challenges and Malaysia Commitments Toward Carbon Neutral Nation. What are the top 13 GHG emission producing countries? China is the highest GHG producing country with emission percentage of global total is 22.7%, while United States is second highest with 15.6%, followed by India with 5.7%. Let's see what are the leading emission reduction challenges faced by the GHG emission producing countries. Some of the challenges are: 1. Rising consumer and/or industrial energy demand. 2. Dependence on fossil fuels as energy sources, especially oil and coal. 3. Deforestation. 4. The absence of relevant climate change policies and programs. 5. Problems implementing existing climate change policies and programs. 6. Political opposition to climate change legislation. 7. The need to change people's behavior. 8. Political and economic crises. Emission reduction challenges are different among different countries. In this presentation, we select a few countries with the highest emission percentage of global total and few countries with the lowest emission percentage of global total. Countries with highest emission of global total are China, United States, India, Russia, and Japan. Now let's see the challenges faced by each of these countries. First, China. China has experienced rapid economic development, urbanization, and industrialization for over 3 decades since its commencement of reform and opening up policy. According to a 2015 scholarly report, 90% of China's carbon emission derives from various fossil fuels. In terms of industrial sectors, manufacturing and power generation are jointly responsible for 85% of China's total carbon emission in 2012. This massive energy consumption has not only led to enormous carbon emissions but has also caused notorious air pollution. Next, United States. CA is the second largest contributor of greenhouse gas at 16% of global emissions. The US faces considerable challenges to making the reductions pledged at the Paris summit. The greatest hurdle for the US to hold up its end of the Paris Agreement is occurring at the policy level. A combination of political gridlock on decision-making and political opposition to decisions addressing climate change are preventing much meaningful action at the national level. In India, the leading emission reduction challenges are rising consumer and/or industrial demand for energy-intensive products and services, dependence on fossil fuels for economic growth combined with a strong fossil fuel lobby, deforestation, and high energy use encouraged by government policies and programs. In Russia, there are several issues that prevent an easy way forward with decreasing GHG emissions. These include: 1. Fossil fuels are accessible and relatively low price. 2. The country's economy is based on energy-consuming industries with heavy and partially old technologies. 3. There are no state restrictions or limitations for GHG emissions, though the first steps in creating the state regulation tool as well as developing instruments for accounting and reporting have been undertaken. Meanwhile, in Japan, the leading emission reduction challenge is dependency on fossil fuels as energy sources. After the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident caused by the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, Japan's energy plan, which had focused on nuclear power, was reconsidered. Since all nuclear power plants had stopped just after the earthquake, fossil fuels have accounted for the most of the electricity supply. This switch from nuclear power to fossil fuels has steadily increased the carbon emissions in Japan. Next, we look at countries with lowest emission of global total, which are Thailand, Spain, Nigeria, Ukraine, and Turkey. Now, let's look at the challenges in Thailand. With respect to the emission profile, the second national communication indicates that 67% of Thailand's total GHG emissions in 2000 were from the energy sector. The main problem which hinders Thailand's reduction in GHG emissions is the high costs and capacity constraints in the energy sector, particularly costs of technologies and infrastructures, which can serve as a significant barrier to investments in renewable energy. Since Thailand is a developing country, it lacks the high technical capacity and effective coordination, which are required to support energy efficiency reforms. Next, Spain. There are 2 reasons why Spain's recent economic crisis has set back progress in reducing its GHG emissions. 1. It completely derailed the progress that Spain had made in moving toward renewable sources of energy. 2. As Spain attempts to recover from its financial crisis, its largest sector of GHG emissions, transport, may continue to increase in activity and thus increase its level of emissions. In Nigeria, the leading emission reduction challenges are traditional bush burning in preparing land for farming, Absence of environmental education on climate change in the rural areas with particular reference to the use of wood as major source of energy for domestic purposes. Inadequate provision in environmental laws on the control of industrial air pollution. Inadequate institutional structure and poor capacity on climate change in federal and state ministries of environment. And discordant national policy on climate change. Next, Ukraine. Ukraine currently is in a state of a deep political and economic crisis. The war has led to the shutdown of many of the country's environmental programs, especially the ones that have to do with hydraulic power development, many of which were based in the Crimea. High cost of green technologies currently makes environmental modernization impossible for a significant number of companies. The country's extremely rigid regulatory framework and the complexity of administrative procedures that have to do with ecological matters. At present, obtaining environmental licenses and permits entails numerous bureaucratic obstacles and often unnecessarily excessive paperwork. In Turkey, the leading emission reduction challenges include rising consumer and/or industrial energy demand, dependence on fossil fuels as energy sources, especially oil and natural gas, and the current political crisis. Increasing economic growth and dependence on imported energy can be counted as factors that constrain Turkey's ability to fulfill its Paris Agreement goals. Dependence on imported energy that is mainly fossil fuels. According to current plans, Turkey might achieve its Paris Agreement pledge by boosting its renewable energy production and making improvements in energy efficiency. However, the reduction of energy dependency by using coal at its source creates a conflict with reduction of GHG. We have seen the challenges faced by the countries in GHG emission reduction. Now we look at some suggestions for mitigation activities of GHG emission reduction and removal enhancement initiatives. The suggestions are: energy demand and use management, energy efficiency, technology or process improvements, GHG capture and storage in a GHG reservoir, management of transport and travel demands, fuel switching and substitution, afforestation, waste minimization, and alternative fuels and raw materials are used to avoid landfilling or incinerating the waste. Malaysia towards carbon neutral by 2050. A low-carbon emissions pathway for Malaysia. Malaysia set a target to reduce intensity of GHG emissions by 45% by 2030, 35% unconditionally and 10% conditional. Carbon neutral Malaysia by 2050. Under the 12th Malaysia Plan, Malaysia has set an ambition to be a carbon neutral nation by 2050. Malaysia upgraded its NDC target to reduce intensity of GHG emissions by 45% by 2030 unconditionally. Status quo. While Malaysia has outlined its intentions towards carbon neutrality, action has yet to accelerate. Below is comparison between Malaysia and regional peers of different initiatives taken with respect to the Paris Agreement, which Malaysia has committed to achieve net zero carbon yang 2050. We are also in our progress to phase out coal power plant and to introduce carbon pricing with incentives in renewable energy. So far, only United Kingdom has given commitment on all initiatives as highlighted in the Paris Agreement. In order to dramatically reduce emissions, Malaysia needs to protect carbon sinks and accelerate the replacement of fossil fuel-based energy with renewable energy, while reducing emissions across other sectors such as transport, industry and waste. The CEO Action Network, CAN, in 2021 report highlighted a few points for government's attention, such as access to open and timely data, government to provide policy and lead the way, harmonization of law and regulations, enhance carbon sequestration and private sector's contribution. Malaysia, steps taken toward neutral carbon nation by 2050 including measure and disclose GHG Scope 1 and 2 emissions for main operations, set public targets on GHG Scope 1 and 2, commit to implement TCFD recommendations and to achieve net zero by 2050, and commit to develop and publish a progressive roadmap by year 2023. Malaysia, a new transformation on energy sector. The energy sector is estimated to account for 80% of Malaysia's greenhouse gas emissions and therefore plays a critical role in Malaysia's decarbonization. Renewable energy share in the capacity mix as of 2021 is 17%. Malaysia aims to increase the usage of renewable energy up to 40% by year 2035.